interesting UFC debut from Canada's own KB Bhullar, the Bengal. It's a great nickname. This is a guy that's coming out of Unified MMA, former middleweight champ. Recently picked up a big win over Matt Dwyer in his last time out. You might be familiar with the name Matt Dwyer. He had a couple of fights in UFC, actually more than a couple. Had a win there, had a few losses, but fought some good competition there as well. I mean, the last two, Alan Jouban and Rude Boy Randy Brown, just to name a few. And since then, he had been racking up some wins. Bhullar going in there 7-0, picked up a really big decision win. We'll talk about that fight a little bit more. It is hard, and I'm sure there's going to be comments out there, hey, where can I find fight tape of KB Bhullar? You can find it. It's there. You got to check out the seedy parts of the internet. I'm talking the Facebooks and Fight TV. You might have to drop some coin. We had to drop $6.88 Canadian to watch that Matt Dwyer fight, but it was worth it, and we picked up some valuable intel because you can find clips out there of KB Bhullar taking on Cody Cran in the fight before that. And what we know about KB Bhullar coming out of Hayabusa Training Center in Edmonton, Alberta. And listen, Alberta, we've seen some UFC fighters out of there. I mean, Bonneville's own Tanner Boser lighting up heavyweight right now. And I know last weekend, John Anik made a point, and rightfully so, Matt, you made the same point. Charles Jourdain, is he our only hope as Canadians to have a big-time talent at, you know, just maybe 45 or just in MMA in general? I think we might have forgot about Tanner Boser for just a second there, but there are a few, top talents popping up. KB Bhullar's one of those guys right now, undefeated. He can have a fan-friendly style. I mean, he started out his mixed martial arts career in Taekwondo. He's rounded it out over the last bit of time and took on UFC caliber competition in Matt Dwyer's last time out, picked up a decision win. Opposite him, Tom Breese is getting ready for a fight against Russia's Roman Kopylov. And what can I say about Tom Breese? I mean, he fought a decent level of competition at 70, moved up to 85. He had lost a split decision to Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland's a wild striker. He can do a lot of special things on the feet, and he's moving up to 85. That's interesting. But for Tom Breese, picked up a huge win over Judo Dan Kelly, a guy who loved knee wraps, and it was a huge win for him there. He had a long layoff between that fight and the fight against Brendan Allen, and I know there were varying reasons as to why. I know he had battled anxiety, and it was just tough for him to make the walk to the cage. He'd been booked in a lot of different fights. He drew Brendan Allen. We had picked Allen in that fight, and you've seen it recently, just how good Brendan Allen's been from going from LFA to maybe not looking so stellar in some of his fights to now really bringing everything together. The fight against Kyle Daukaus was great. The fight against Tom Breese was a huge statement win because Tom Breese, what we know about him, this guy when he shows up, his striking's on point. He's one of the most electrifying guys. I say that because I get pumped up for some of these fights, but you can't sleep on a Tom Breese fight, man.
You really can't, and that Dan Kelly fight was a really important one because a lot of people forget there was a time when Dan Kelly was actually a favorite over Derek Brunson in an MMA fight. I'm just going to take a second, let that sink in, that Judo Dan Kelly was the favorite over Derek Brunson. Now, of course, Derek Brunson knocked him out in about 50 seconds, but Dan Kelly, another one of those great measuring stick guys, but I would even have him kind of a step above. Like, if you beat Dan Kelly, maybe it's not a top 15 guy, but if you beat Dan Kelly, I'll say it's the Jim Miller effect, where you beat him, it's not an easy fight from there on out. It's a guy who's well-known enough, and people know of his skill, that if you beat him, you're going to fight a guy who at least at one point was in the top 15. And you're probably not going to get a number next to your name shortly after, but it's a very good statement win. And Tom Breese looked huge in that fight. It was one of those situations where, you know when you see Thiago Santos like 205, and you're like, oh my god, how did that man weigh 185 pounds for any period of his life? Tom Breese kind of had that, because he was bigger than Dan Kelly, and he was like much more physical than him. And Tom Breese does have kind of one of those more, his style relies on his athleticism a lot. And the fighter who always comes to mind when I say this is Alexander Rakic, because Rakic is one of those unique MMA talents where athleticism doesn't always come into play in MMA. You look at a guy like, here's a good example, Paulo Costa, Israel Adesanya. You look at Paulo Costa, you're like, well, he's by far the more athletic out of the two. But then when you use, MMA skills and whatnot, they can kind of equal that barrier. With Tom Breese, he uses physicality along with his really good boxing skills, goes to the body, which is something that you, first of all, if you're an MMA fighter who goes to the body with your punches, automatically you already at a much higher striking level than other people in MMA, because that's really where I separate the high-level MMA strikers from like the regular MMA strikers. If you're one of those guys who can go leg, body, and head and go do them all consistently, I immediately put you in kind of a separate category for striking. Not that Tom Breese is some Israel Adesanya as striker,
but he could become the next Stipe Miocic or Alexander Volkanovski or Max Holloway with that style, right?
No.
Okay.
The elbows are really good from Tom Breese, and that was kind of his downfall in the Brendan Allen fight, and that's kind of what I'm tying this back into. his clinch work is phenomenal. If Tom Breese can get close, he's got those good elbows. Reminds me a little bit of Anthony Smith in that regard, where if he gets you up against the cage, he can just kind of unload on you. And if he does get that single collar tie or the tie clinch, he can really, beat you up pretty bad in there. KB Bhullar, though, just from the limited sample size we've been able to see from his fights, the Dwyer fight was interesting because I think we'll both agree Dwyer in that second round already looked really, really tired and kind of brought it back.
We got to throw this out there. I mean, you always talk about it early on in a fight. The Sandhagen Sterling fight is a perfect one because the guys are still dry. Sterling's just able to get down, get on the back, and sink that choke in so quick and get that finish. Whereas you look at that fight between Dwyer and Bhullar, and they were sweating by the end of the first hardcore, and Dwyer walked out there in the second and looked like a zombie. Now, he was able to ride on like a tricycle or like a beach cruiser, so to speak, because we weren't in second or third gear. We just stayed in a first gear, if that. And the output went down from Dwyer. He kind of went to wrestling and went to clinch work. And we saw Bhullar in the later rounds. It was like, all right, well, Matt Dwyer's taking him down. And KB Bullar's not as flashy of a striker as we've seen. And that's the other thing. With KB Bhullar, he's a southpaw from convention, I guess. He'll switch it over to orthodox. And Matt, you and I talked about this before we filmed the video. The fact that there's a lot of people you'll see, if they're a southpaw fighter, they'll switch into orthodox quick. They'll do something, an explosive movement, a nice low kick. They'll attack the knee. They'll hit the body. They'll throw, maybe they've got a Superman punch, something wild. We see this from KB Bhullar. He'll go from southpaw to orthodox. He just doesn't really string a whole lot together. And we saw that in the fight before the Dwyer fight. We saw that in the fight against Cody Cran where he'd do it. It didn't really set a whole lot up. Now, he's got flying knees. He's got really explosive movements. We saw it in the fight against Dwyer where he threw a wild, not Fight Night Picks question mark kicks, but he threw a question mark kick off his lead leg that dropped Dwyer. Cool, yeah. But Dwyer was so tired in that fight. So it was a little bit of a combination of both. But KB Bhullar, he's a flashy striker. He's got really nice things that he can bring out. And that last fight, a 5-round fight. But man, it wasn't the best 5-round fight.
No, and I just think it's a lot to ask for a guy like Tom Breese. Yes, he's had his issues as of late, but if you lose to Sean Strickland many years ago at this point, and then in your last fight you lose to Brendan Allen, who was a win over Ian Heinisch, and was supposed to fight Ian Heinisch again until Heinisch unfortunately got hurt, but I think really highly of Brendan Allen, so losing to him, even if it was in the first round, I don't think that takes too much shine off of you. And I was still pretty high on Tom Breese. I think if he can kind of get it together for this fight, if he comes in there with a good state of mind and just goes out there and performs to the best of his abilities, I don't see how Tom Breese loses this fight.
And I mean, Matt, with the wrestling pedigree of Tom Breese, and I say pedigree, but he has it in his back pocket for sure. And I know it was mentioned, if you want to go back and find something really interesting, because this happens sometimes with Fight Night Picks, we had Tom Breese's coach pop into the chat and say that, we were high on Brendan Allen as far as his grappling was concerned. He offered quite a bit of a paragraph in favor of Tom Breese's grappling, the improvements that he had made, and it was something that we needed to watch out for. And maybe it didn't happen in that fight, but you can see as advertised on Tom Breese's Tapology page that it is something he's worked on. I mean, Grapplefest 6 against former Cage Warriors champ Lee Chadwick, Andy Clamp at Grapplefest 7, and then Freddie Vosgroni at Polaris UK. And hey, Polaris events are fun too. So Tom Breese has all of that and a bag of chips. KB Bhullar coming in here, head of steam, the Canadian. Over on Tapology, though, at a 586 total votes, 78% going Breese, 58% saying he's going to win by decision. The odds are overwhelmingly in the English fighter's favor. Tom Breese opened a -215. The line popped up just ever so slightly for Bhullar, and it's dropped down since. Tom Breese -262 favorite. KB Bhullar coming in here, the +210 underdog after opening, +165. So everybody's in the favor of Breese. Hopefully we gave, a little bit of perspective on both these guys, because you got to run it kind of down the middle. I mean, KB Bhullar, he can be a flashy striker. He can switch his stances. He could very well catch Tom Breese with something totally unorthodox that he's never going to see and send him 6 ways to Sunday. I just don't see that happening in this one. And I'm going to have to side with the guy that I can't say he's been consistent, but I can't say he's been totally inconsistent, and that's troubling. But I do like Tom Breese more in this fight.
Oh, yeah, Tom Breese, higher level of competition. Again, he hasn't been active as of late, but I know what I'm going to get when the best Tom Breese goes out there. And again, I don't really know what the best Tom Breese is at this point, but from what I've seen of him throughout his UFC career, him at his best, really good power, really good movement, really good cardio, and that's going to be hard to beat for anyone in the UFC debut, so I'm also picking Tom Breese.
Matt, both of us going with Tom Breese. Unfortunately, we can't side with the Canadian. It seems like lately we can never side with the Canadians unless you're Charles Jourdain. You end up with a weird draw. Really looking forward to this card coming at us this weekend. We're going to extend a look at our main event between Marlon Moraes and Cory Sandhagen. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, and as we always say, let's get into it.